All righty. So it should be recording. If it's not recording, sorry, let me know. So welcome to the fundamentals of access testing. Emphasis on the fun, even though it can be a little mixture of both. We're so happy you guys are here to join us. We hope this is a really informative time and that you learn a lot and that you feel prepared for access testing, which is kicking off in just a couple weeks. My name is Laura McCauley, and I am the Assistant Director of Programming for the SCML Educator Network. If this is your first event with us, welcome. Oh, you're good, Michelle. No worries. We're happy to have you. However, even if you're just listening, we also are so happy to welcome Deann McManus, who is incredible. She is the English Language Proficiency Assessment Program Manager. That's a mouthful. From Office of Assessments and Standards from the SCDE. She is the person that lets us know everything that we need to know. We so appreciate everything that she does for our state when it comes to testing, whether it's screening, access testing, all of the alt testing, all those kinds of things. We so appreciate you. And we're also so happy to have Jonathan White, who is the multilingual learner program consultant for Richland One. I've heard literally nothing but good things about you, Jonathan, from multiple different people. So thank you so much for both being able to come. We do have a couple housekeeping things. Number one, you're always welcome to join us on social media. We have a public social media Facebook account for anyone. And then we also have a private one just for South Carolina educators. Feel free to join us on any of those. We post on social media regularly. We also have a website, and we would love for you to bookmark it. All of our resources and stuff that we create go on the website. And Melinda, if you could copy and paste the link to our website there. If you would like to join our mailing list, you can take a picture of that QR code and join our mailing list. The only thing that we send you is a newsletter once a month. And then sometimes if something's coming up, we send a newsletter for that. But otherwise, we're not spamming your inboxes. It's a great way to know. Feel free for classroom teachers to be involved and join that as well. We would love for you to join on any of those if you're not. We are announcing today, and it was if you got the newsletter today, it's in it. But we are doing a book study starting in March. The programming committee is super pumped about this. This book is by Malala, and it's called "We Are Displaced." It is an incredible book. I read it just on my own a few months ago, and it's such a empowering and powerful story about women from all over the world sharing their refugee and internally displaced stories, and just incredible and strong women. And it's such an easy book to read. It's kind of like in little short stories where each person kind of talks about their own story. Malala shares her story. So join us. It's going to be all online, maybe a virtual meeting at the end, but other than that, it's just responding to the questions. All SE educators are invited, whether you are work at the university, whether you are a administrator or a classroom teacher or an ML specialist. We welcome anybody, and we would love for you to join us. It's such a powerful book. I know some of our committee members have read it and they have loved it as well. And we will be giving professional development credit pending your district's approval. We always like to reward you for participating and joining that. A couple housekeeping things before we get started. Please keep your sound off. That way we can hear Deann and Jonathan. If you have any questions, put them in the chat box. Share the link for the book study. I'll type in the name of the book in a minute, or Melinda, you can. Yeah, share it soon. Love that, Melinda. Melinda, if you can go ahead and share the link for the feedback survey, we will share it again at the end. But please fill out the feedback survey. We are literally here to serve you guys. And so we can't serve you guys if we don't have your feedback, whether it's good or bad. And we always ask you for suggestions on what you want to see. We are a nonprofit, so we're truly here to serve. And we will be sending you certificates. And so please give our team a couple days to get your certificate to you if you're attending live. All righty. So we're just going to jump right in. Deann, we're going to start with you, and then we'll do Jonathan. And then the next question, we'll do Jonathan and then Deann. So let's do this. So the first question, we're going to kind of split it up into before, during, and after access testing. So hopefully that helps everyone's brains kind of wrap around this a little bit. So what do you recommend teachers do to prepare their students for the access test? And Deann, you kind of talked about this on your podcast, but what would you suggest, Deann?
I think the biggest thing is don't make it a big thing. It's important and it matters, but it's not the thing. So just, help them understand what it is, why they need to do it. Um, and if you have middle, high school kids, probably even upper elementary, get them ready to turn their phone in because they don't need to have a device on their person. So go ahead and have that conversation before test day too. But just encouraging them to do their best and go through the sample items as well. Do the online practice every year, every kid, every time. So that way, it's not the first time they're seeing that and practicing that.
For sure.
Yeah.
Jonathan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good answer. I think I always look at preparing for access in two ways, in terms of like there's short term, you want to practice, you want to do those sample items, but there's a long-term concept of preparing for access that really is important with and it goes back to Deann's comment about access not being that, not the only thing. Like access is truly nothing if you're not talking about access and making access a part of your larger routines on a daily basis, starting at the beginning of the year. If students don't know why they're taking access, if people in your school don't know what access is, then access doesn't mean anything and you can just relax. And I mean, access is a really good name for a test. It tests access. And if your students don't have access, then there's really not a lot you can do short-term access. I mean, I just think there's a lot more to talk about what we could be doing long-term, talking about access. Kids should know what their scores are, what that means, what their history is. And if you're talking about those things in classes, they're acquiring English as you do that. And it's academic English in its place. And so I just there's definitely a long-term answer to this question that hopefully, when you get into January, it's like we don't have time to talk about this part anymore. So
Yeah.
practice the questions.
Yeah.
And make sure everybody, but I mean, I always tell people the kids are the experts on these tests. Most of the kids we teach know this test better than I do. They've taken it. Like it's been something that's been central to them for years. And so they just, I mean, you got to figure out, I guess sometimes you'll have your newcomers, but I mean, even then, right? Like what are they going to do on this test? Let them enjoy the test. Let them just get through it. Don't make it a pressure thing for your newcomers. I don't know. There's a lot you can do to prepare.
Yeah, there's a lot. Thank y'all. All right. So Jonathan, you'll start off with this one. So in your opinion, so a lot of times, this has been a transition that South Carolina has been trying to make over the past couple of years, making sure that our STCs have a bigger role in access testing. So can you define the difference in the roles for planning and executing access testing for the school testing coordinator and the test administrator, which is the ML teacher?
Yeah, this one causes me a lot of stress because
Oh,
I'm the one
yes.
that gets a lot of questions about. I get a lot of questions from ESOL teachers or that all I can say is that's a school testing coordinator question.
Mhm.
So typically, I mean, my short answer for this is the school testing coordinator. This test should just look like all the other tests that the school testing coordinator is trained to coordinate, is an expert at coordinating, and accepts the responsibility of coordinating. And if you look at any of those other tests that happen in your school, if if someone's giving SC Ready, for example, and you have a question and you would go to your STC for that question, then you're going to do that for access.
Mhm.
Otherwise, and then I mean, when I was in the classroom, I administered all the other state tests too, and so your role as the access administrator, test administrator, should look just like what it was when you gave SC Ready or when you're administering MAP or STAR or whatever those other things that you're just the person delivering those pieces. I don't know. It gets complicated, and a lot of times testing coordinators are like, well, I'm going to let you do this one this time, but it shouldn't be that way.
Yeah, for sure. Deann?
Jonathan, slide over. I'm going to step up on that soapbox with you.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't have said that better. The school testing coordinator coordinates the administration of the test. They're the ones who are responsible for printing your test tickets, your roster, making sure, everything in WIDA AMS is correct. They're the ones that should be doing that. The test administrator should, as it says, administer the test. So
Yeah, for
that's
sure.
my short answer.
Thank y'all. All right, Deann, what are your
Mhm.
tips for ensuring that teachers know all the students that need to take access in their building? Just so we don't miss anybody.
All right, so you don't miss anybody. This is something that should have started on the first day of school, because that's when you start to realize and recognize who's in your building. So you need to start with last year's access scores, who met proficiency criteria, who exited your program, who has come in to your program. A couple of ways that I did that in my district, I would run or have my Power School person run me a report based on English proficiency. It's super easy to pull in Power School. And so that way you can just verify who has that English proficiency level that qualifies them in Power School. Um, Now that we have Elevation as well, if your district is using Elevation, you can pull that report from there. That's, super easy, and you have access to all of those kids in that way. Um, and then once you have that information, then your STC can print you a roster from WeDA AMS that'll show you if those students are actually entered into test registrations so that you know you're getting everybody that you ought to be testing.
Yeah, I think that's a
How do
good
you do
answer.
it, Jonathan?
I mean, I think you lean on your Power School secretary, you lean on your database person. They should be able to run a roster for you. But you mentioned the school testing coordinator again. Like, school testing coordinator should be able to tell you who's supposed to take this test.
Mhm.
And I just go back to the what I was saying about long-term preparation for access at the beginning of this, and that is, I mean, Deann, you said that, like, you should know from day one who those people are going to be, have a running list of who those people are. And if you don't and you miss somebody, that's the only thing I would say is, don't take it don't feel bad that you missed somebody in the end, if because it just speaks to whole school
Mhm.
issues and long-term issues that you got to get right starting with day one
Mhm.
from year to year.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah.
it should be an easy thing. It should be easy. I mean, in Richland one, we just say that you have to have this really good relationship with your database secretary.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, how Valentine's candy is going on sale already. Pick up an extra bag of chocolate, if you need to get on their good side, that's one way you can do that. I would also make sure you're not testing kids who don't need to
Yeah, that's a good
test.
one. Yeah.
That's a big one too. If you had a kid who met exit or proficiency criteria in 23, make sure their English proficiency got updated to P1 in
Mhm.
Power School, because if it didn't, they got pulled in pre-code and they're in a test session and somebody's going to pull them and hand them a ticket. And once they test, if they don't meet those criteria again, they're back in your program.
Oof.
Oof.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Oof.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, thank y'all. Yeah, for sure. I always kept an additional spreadsheet on my own just to make sure I had cross-checked it about 100 times, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Excel is your friend with
Yes,
access test.
absolutely. All right, so Jonathan, what are some common solutions you see when dealing with the lack of space for access testing?
So this is funny because I I remember when I first started doing this and I came in. So and I had a mentor teacher. I was the third ESOL teacher in a building, and this guy that he retired 2 years later. So he's an old school ESOL teacher, and he's like, I reserve the library day one of the school year for whenever access is going to be, whatever the first week of access is. I reserve the entire library. And so I always tell people that it's pretty cool piece of advice is just reserve whatever rooms you need to reserve. And again, long-term answer, right? Next year, or start early, talk to whoever it is and say, like, I'm reserving these. I know the dates that I'm going to do this. I'm going to reserve this space for that. But I also think this is a school testing coordinator type of a question too,
Yes.
right? It's they need to solve that problem. And if I don't know. This ends up coming back on ESOL teachers all the time though, because then it's like you got a tiny room and you're gonna have to do extra work and have multiple sessions when you could easily have one big session.
Mhm.
And I just sympathize with people who have to go through that. You see it both ways. You see people who reserve rooms and who work really well with the administration to talk about the importance of the test and just getting it done and finding the space and shutting the school down or shutting the hall down just like you would do with any other test. And then you also see people who are like, oh, we're not going to give you any special circumstances. You just figure out how to do this. So it's definitely harder when you have that situation.
Deann?
Yeah, I'm with Jonathan. Lean on your administration. Let them help you find the space that you need. And sometimes you just have to be creative. Sometimes we've tested in conference rooms. I've, sat in multi-purpose rooms and libraries. So you just kind of have to be creative and reach out to networks like this. Somebody else has probably had that problem.
Yeah.
Crowdsource it.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it also helps to discuss with the other teachers in your building. You want them to understand the importance of the test. And if there are even other teachers who understand the importance of the test, then you have allies to start talking about the space that you need. And you hopefully have people who have access to space, even if you don't have access to that space.
Yeah, I love that. So, I can't remember who started with this. Was it Deann? I don't know. Anyway,
this is a Deann question. Make it a Deann question.
That's why I lost it there. So scheduling. So someone asked, like, what are the rules? If we can just remind people of the rules of scheduling based on grade levels or tiers. So any tips, and then a subset, any tips for scheduling, like in the elementary level, middle, and high. Elementary is a little bit easier to schedule, in my opinion, than middle and high school. But any tips with that, and then obviously making it fit in with their general schedule. Obviously, that's a bigger issue in middle and high school.
Yeah. So y'all see what I just pulled out, right?
Yeah.
Yes, the TAM.
Because
The other
all of
go-to
this,
answer, if it's not STC, it's TAM.
Exactly.
So that's also in here. So remember, you can't give a reading test and a listening test in the same room. If you need to, you can cross grade levels, or grade level clusters, unless you're giving, like that writing test, grades 1 through 3, that's going to be read aloud. And that's not going to work. If you're giving different tiers, that probably won't work or shouldn't work. To me, it was always, like you said, a struggle to schedule for middle and high school. I was always just, will you please give me first and second block, or, whatever that first chunk of time is in the morning. But, if you have kids who are going to your CAPE center, or, are in like a dual enrollment program, so who aren't on your campus all day, every day, that does make it a little more tricky to get that scheduled. My defer or preferred method, I guess, of scheduling was just to keep all of my second graders together and move them through, just because that kind of helped. They were already lumped into those sessions anyway. So that's kind of my go-to plan. But you also kind of want to think about, do you have kids who aren't going to get along in a group or something like that? Sometimes you got to be creative about those situations. So that's kind of a start. I don't know how helpful that is. What can you add to that, Jonathan?
Well, I just think like it's funny, like the rules for scheduling and yeah, definitely the test manual. I don't even know those things, and I'm always the person who's like rereads the same page in the test manual every year, 5 times. I would say I don't know those rules, and I can't answer that part. But in terms of tips, I think again, Excel is your friend. Build some sort of schedule that shows, breaks down your time. I think there's 2 ways to approach, you in it. We've already kind of hit on that. Like in a building, you'll have allies and you'll have relationships with your administration. And if you do, in an ideal world, you can shut down. You just shut down and do access and get it over with. And you have administration and other teachers who respect that. And you can just say like, this is the schedule. You have a testing coordinator who's going to build the schedule, first of all. So you want an administrator who's in charge of building that schedule. You want to be able to offer advice on that. You want input on that. But if you have an administrator and administration typically want to make things simple for themselves. And so I would just try to, attach to that tendency for them to want to be simple. And you want to just say like, yeah, we just need to get like all of my second graders, they're going to do the listening and the reading first thing in the morning. And I don't care where they're supposed to be. We'll send them back to class when they're done with this test. And then the next day they're going to do the writing. And then I'm going to bring them in to do the speaking when, and then that speaks to Deann's point. She's a really good point about the circumstances where you got to keep track of those things too. Those students that you don't want testing together. But I guess my first thought is just like, go with the general first of all, right? Like try and get everybody, as many people as possible done as quickly as possible. Because if you don't have a testing coordinator who's willing to give you first and second period for a week, then I don't know. I mean, that's when you start. That's when I see teachers develop a bad attitude about access, because it just makes it hard. And again, you want to cultivate the relationship to be able to not have to be that person who's like, oh, you can only test them during your testing period.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where administration buy-in is key, because once they're going to help deal with the teachers for sure.
Yeah. And I like Jamie's comment in the chat too. Trying to group high school students by similar proficiency or ability levels so they finish about the same time. So that way, you don't have 2 kids who are done in 10 minutes and then 4 kids who are working for an hour.
Yeah.
That's solid advice too.
For sure.
Yep.
So, Jonathan, and you may not, this may be complicated, so you may go to Deann. But so this was suggested by our other assistant director, Kristen, as kind of a reminder for everyone. Where can I find my students' IEP accommodations for access? And how and where do SDCs input access accommodations into DRC Insight?
Don't worry about it. Their testing coordinator is supposed to do that.
That's right.
No, I mean, yeah, I just turn back to the long-term answer, right? Like these are things that, I mean, presumably you've been a part of the IEP meeting, you've seen an IEP, you were there to sign off on the IEP, you were the one that made sure that the IEP included access accommodations in the first place, and it shouldn't be something that's foreign to you. If you're getting a student new from another school, they were 5th grade last year, you're a 6th grade teacher, then, I mean, you should have a testing coordinator who's already got a list of all the students, just like you provided your testing coordinator with a list of all of the MLs and their accommodations. Your testing coordinator should have that from SPED 2. That's a perfect world. When that kind of thing starts to break down, I mean, that's where it's hard for me to answer that question. I'll let Deann answer the hard part of that question. I mean, I assume that you can access IEPs and enrich, correct? I mean, most people. I hate for you to have to be the person who has to go digging on your own for that kind of thing.
Yeah, and remember, not every district's the same. So
yeah,
I have found that some folks don't know this. If you have access to the IEP, there is an accommodation section within the IEP, and it's about halfway through or so. So you can find what those accommodations are there. I've had a lot of questions lately about putting IEP accommodations on their iLab. There's a reason that those accommodations for access are not on the iLab, because they're not available to every ML. They are IEP accommodations that address something entirely different than the iLab addresses. Right? So the IEP addresses their disability, the iLab addresses their language. So these two need to work together. They don't mirror each other, they complement each other. So that's why those accommodations aren't on the iLab. Now, once you find them in the IEP, then the STC can go into WIDA AMS, and there's a section in student management. They can go into that student. There's a place for their demographic information. The middle tab says accommodations. and they can go in and click, 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 click. And Bob's your uncle. You got your accommodations put in.
Perfect. Yeah. And they use DRC Insight for SC Ready, SC Pass. So
Right.
hopefully they
Right.
already know
They
how to
should
do
know how to
this.
do that. That's exactly like,
Right.
don't you know how to do that?
Yeah.
It's a separate platform, but it looks a lot the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Deann, where this has been
Oh,
a
this is good.
contention over the years. Where should I keep my access testing materials?
Don't ask me, because I've kept them in some bad places in the past that I will only ask for forgiveness on.
Just plead the fifth, Jonathan. Plead
Yeah.
the fifth.
Yeah. Well, this statute of limitations has run out on those.
So this is a secure test. We pay a lot of money to have this test. WIDA pays a lot of money to develop these items. A lot of items were leaked on social media last year. That's expensive.
Oh.
All right. So this is where test security comes in. So secure materials, any items, any test questions, test materials, anything you sign in or out. If it is not physically on your person, it should be behind lock and key. Best case scenario, if it's in your classroom, it's locked in a cabinet and your classroom door is locked. Okay. Because there are master keys to your classroom, so people can get into your classroom. And if that material is left on your desk, it's out, you know? So lock it away again. At least put it in a drawer and out of sight if that's your very last option. Things like your TAM, that is not secure. You know, the directions are not secure. You shouldn't leave them out or post them online, but you know, that's okay if it gets, but secure items are secure. Protect your student information the same way. Those test tickets that have their name and identifying information on it, protect that information. If you are in WIDA AMS and you have access to student demographic information, that needs to remain private as well. So don't leave that up on your screen when you leave your classroom. Just Control-Alt-Delete and lock your computer before you walk away. So again, it should be locked. That's where your access materials should be. On the whole, if you're not testing like during the day or at night when you leave for the school day, you should have a secure room for your materials. That's part of an expectation for your school and your district, is that you have a secure room for your materials. A lot of times it's a vault or it's a room that locks and only that person and maybe an administrator have a key. There is not a master key to that room so that those materials are secure.
Mm-hmm.
And if we come to monitor, which you should always assume that we're going to come hang out with you on test day, that's one of the first things we're going to ask to see is, where's your secure room? We're going to make sure you unlock it when we get there. So it's really important.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I'll add is also just make sure whatever's in the secure room, only take out what you need at the time too. I mean, that's where I always run into trouble is when you take out too much stuff because you're like, oh, well, later in the day I might need this, or this is just what I'm going to have for all this time tomorrow throughout the course of the week. And that causes you to want to just hold on to stuff when you could just leave it where it needs to be and go back and forth to that secure spot.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Additionally, once you have signed out those materials, somebody gave me the good advice, treat them like your baby, keep them on your hip. You know, if you wouldn't put your infant on the counter in the bathroom while you go, don't put your testing bucket on the bathroom counter, because if you leave them unattended, we can't really account for what happened to them. And it might happen that, you know, we've had calls where materials got the bucket filled with water from the sink because somebody left them on the counter and somebody came to wash their hands, and water damage.
Wow.
Yeah. So, you know, take care of those things before you get your materials.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Treat it like your baby. Keep it on your hip.
Mm-hmm.
Don't leave your baby in your room.
Hey, the good thing is we do all this all this computer testing now. I mean, I remember when it was like you had boxes and boxes of paper stuff, and I mean, that's when I messed up and kept things in places that were convenient because you had so much.
Mhm.
Yep. Agreed.
So, Jonathan, about that, what are some tips for organizing testing materials?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back. Excel is your friend, right? Make sure checklist after checklist. Deann says, sign out your material. So you want to have a list of all the material. You want to have a list of all of your students, what materials they need. I mean, I consider us all lucky now that there's a lot less material, but
Mhm.
I mean, bins, drawers, locks. This definitely ties into the last question. I mean, if you're paying attention to security, I think you're gonna find that you have to be organized.
Yeah.
Do your
One,
teachers ever like do you find like especially elementary when you have so many booklets and everything, do those
Yeah.
teachers use like a specific like envelope system or a different tub system like for that day or that test? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen that with I have honestly I haven't gone in and seen a lot of the teachers using, what their particular systems are. I think this is an easy answer here too is your school testing coordinator. A lot of times it's what does the organizational system look like when it comes to materials? What does that look like for all the other tests that your testing coordinator does? And I know that I've worked for people who are very, very careful about it's like Deann said, like my bins. Everybody's got a bin. Every bin is labeled. Everybody signs out that bin. Everybody signs in that bin. Um, but I was the big tip for me is just to make sure that you're collaborating with the people who spend a lot more time thinking about the security of the material than you do.
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that I really appreciated in my district, so each domain got printed on a different color paper for tickets.
Mhm.
So, like, if all of your reading tickets were on pink and listening was on green, well, you knew if you had a listening kid in your reading session,
Mhm.
or you knew if you were doing makeups, um, you could tell, who what should be doing what.
Right.
Um, so I thought that was a good way to keep the domains,
Mhm.
separate and keep track of what you're doing and what's still left. Um, so that's one thing we did too.
Yeah. Yeah, I've done that myself too, for sure.
Mhm.
All
So
right,
yeah.
so during access testing. All right. All right, so Dan, how do you recommend teachers and Jonathan kind of talked about this earlier, but how do you recommend teachers manage their teaching caseload during the access testing window? What do you see across the state? How do people do that?
Hmm.
Yeah, what do you see across the state? This is interesting.
Um, you know what? Sometimes all you can do is all you can do.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, and this is something that we have to do. And there's value and experience in this testing experience as well. Um, I don't recommend that you give your kids a project that you're going to have to grade
Mhm.
between, January and March. Take it easy on yourself as much as you are on your kids. Kind of prep your faculty and staff around you that, these kids are doing this and, maybe they don't want to give a big assignment for the week that they're doing access testing. But yeah, as far as teachers managing their caseload, all you can do is all you can do.
Mhm. Mhm.
But that's funny what you say about giving a project because I feel like one of my go-to like what I think about when I think about what happens during access testing and how you're managing students and what they're doing. A lot of times at least my thought is, okay, what is a project? Maybe it's not something that I'm going to, grade heavily in
Yeah.
that time, but you know, take this time now to set up this is what you're going to be doing when I'm not with you or I mean,
Mm,
because there's a lot of ways to look at this problem of
yeah.
what is your caseload and what happens with students when you're testing and then they're supposed to come to you. They've already taken the test. I mean, I think, but for me, the big answer for this is try to get the testing done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's when it helps to have a test administrator who's going to let you just block the time off and get as much as possible done as soon as possible so that you can get back to teaching and get back to a routine. Um, I I mean, I don't know. This is a tough one because teaching your caseload and managing your caseload can be a lot of different things for different
Mhm.
people. I mean, you've got, well, a lot of times teachers' caseloads are managing what happens to students outside of their class, what happens to students in other classes, and if you're spending, during the testing window, you're spending a lot of time focusing on and organizing your testing material, testing students. You're not there to push in. You're not there to co-teach. You're not there to really pay a lot of attention to students' grades that just drop in their algebra class or in their ELA class. And so it's tough I mean, I don't know. I think, Deann, maybe that's right? Like, just you do what you can do to manage that caseload. I would just say,
Yeah.
set yourself up with a schedule that gets testing over with. And
Mhm.
I don't like the idea of waiting and saying, "Oh yeah, we're gonna push it and we're gonna do it in March." Like we'll do our test. Just do your testing the first week of February and try and get 90% of it done.
So
The
it's
sooner you
okay
start,
to
the sooner you
not.
finish.
Yeah, exactly. Sooner you start, sooner you finish. So it's okay to, yeah, we can ask that in a second, Melinda. It's okay to stop teaching basically and do access. Except for, I guess, in high school, maybe if you have a class, like that you have to, that those kids come to you, specifically like for if you have an elective class. But it's okay. Is it okay to like completely stop meeting with groups basically based on your access schedule?
Again, if you're doing it, if you're trying to get it over with as quickly as
Yeah,
possible, I mean, there's no requirement for the number of minutes you have to serve a student in a week.
right,
And service what your caseload means, what managing your caseload means is such a varied thing, but the majority of what we do is managing a school and an experience in a school. And so, I mean, I don't know what you mean. Like if you're saying like, oh, do I have to teach my 45-minute block every day?
I think a lot of
Like,
people,
no.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, no. I think a lot of people that are comfortable in it understand there's no way you can do access testing and maintain your regular scheduled groups. But some
Right.
people may be new to it, maybe like, are you
Yeah.
sure it's okay? And I'm like, yeah, you got to do what you got to do. You got to do what you got
Yeah,
to
I
do.
mean, keep in mind, right? Like the mantra that ESOL is not an intervention cuts
Right.
both ways, and that is you shouldn't be treating your ESOL, like you're just I have this important intervention that's the only thing I'm gonna do. Like that's not what we're doing. We're making sure that kids have equal access to academic language across the school day. And if you're doing that while doing access, you don't have to have your intervention block.
Right. For sure. For sure. Deanne, Jamie Fletcher asked a question and said, online, a teacher in another state argued that it is illegal to require students to make up missing work from other classes while testing. Is that true? Um, I don't, I think you just can't hold it against them. What do you think, Deanne?
Um, there's a lot of variables in that statement that
Yeah.
may or may not apply
Yeah.
here. Um, and
Just,
this is the kind of thing that is not part of our state policy or guidelines.
okay.
This is also one of those cool rules that you can use where you're like, yeah, it sounds illegal to me. Just you prevent somebody from giving from abusing students. Like
Sure.
you might take advantage of that. I don't know if it's illegal, but
Yeah, for sure.
there's certainly, and I don't know, Deanne, like cover your ears, but like there's so little enforcement when it comes to rules in schools from the state level. Like, what are they going to do? I mean, it just can't be illegal. I can't imagine that it's illegal.
Yeah. I can't either. I'm not sure. All right. Okay. So, Jonathan or Dan, what are some tips for motivating consultative? So students we meet with very, very few times or have taken it literally 1,000 times and or long-term MLs for the access test. How do you motivate these people that are so over it and have been in the program forever?
Y'all tell me. That's a good one.
If anybody has any suggestions, put them in the chat.
I always say, like, to me, this is a relationship point, right? Like you as a teacher have to cultivate relationships with all of the students on your caseload, and it's a long-term answer. If if they're not, I mean, you also can't beat yourself up if kids don't care about this test. But I mean, my go-to response for working with those long-term MLs is in buildings where you have an ESOL teacher who's been the same ESOL teacher for a long time, and they've known them since they were in the 9th grade, and you've got them as seniors, or you've known them since, you've somehow they believe in you because of the relationship that you've developed. To me, that's really the only answer, because otherwise, like, it really, what does it matter to a student?
Mm-hmm. For sure. Deann?
Yeah, that's kind of where I landed when I was working, particularly with middle and high school kids. And you always get those that harumph and complain and
Mhm.
make it a miserable experience for everybody. And maybe not my finest moment, but I've been known to say, well, then pass it and let's be done.
Oh,
Don't
100%.
come back to me next year.
But it does,
100%.
and Melinda made the comment, right, in the chat there, that conference, I mean, those
Yep.
relationships can be grounded in really formal meetings,
Yep.
conferences,
Mm.
and they
Help
should be with
them.
consultative kids throughout the year. In Richland 1, we kind of require that even if they're consultative, you still have to meet with them
Right.
regularly, and that should be part of that conversation. Beginning of the year, here's your score. This is what we're going to want. You got to get ready for this test. Like, I know you
Yep.
hate this thing, but I don't know. The other thing that stands out to me too is just be really sensitive, because a lot of kids hate it
Yeah,
because it makes them feel bad.
sure.
Yeah. They get
So,
singled out.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
I know, like, there's kids, right, that, like, I remember, there's still people that I work with today who were seniors in high school when they were in the 5th grade. I remember them crying because that was their year to exit. And now, and their scores, you look at their scores, they just have terrible scores, and they've just gone down every year since then.
Yeah.
What am I going to say to that kid?
I know. It's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also think that the ESOL teacher in that building is the one who's got the best, the best chance of really making an impact just by just being a good person and in that kid's life. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Dan, what are some tips for administering the speaking test to optimize results? Because you know how difficult it is.
yeah, start in August or July, whenever you come back to school. And remember that this is an academic speaking assessment,
Mhm.
so focus on that academic language. As much as we want to fuss and not like Nina's their model, and she's the one that's modeling what that response needs to sound like.
Mhm.
On the WIDA Secure Portal, there are some webinars on the speaking test that are super helpful. In the short term, some of the things that I tried that I thought really helped my students, I would ask them, if this is a luxury for you in your scheduling, who would you like to be in the room when you test?
Mhm.
I had my 4th and 5th graders, girls and boys didn't want to be together, or,
Mhm.
that's
trying to
cool.
really be strategic in your grouping. That's a big help. I also found save your paper boxes, because their device will fit in the paper box, and it gives them that kind of blocking off,
Mhm.
so they kind of feel like they're in their own little space. Or, if you just use the testing cubbies or carols or file folders, something to give them a place to not feel as exposed. I think that's a thing for a lot of kids.
Yeah.
Um, Follow the guidelines. Don't put 50 kids in a room and give them a speaking test.
Mhm.
There's a reason those are there as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I always told my kids, talk until the time runs out. Don't hit stop. You can't start over. And they're not gonna, you're not gonna be penalized for saying, or whatever. And you decide when you start.
Yeah.
Gather your thoughts. Think about what you're gonna say. Practice it if you want, but don't hit record until you have in your head what you want to talk about. And
Yeah.
then say all you can about it.
Yeah. And you won't be penalized for running out of time either. Um,
Nope.
yeah, for
Nope.
sure.
And I
Jonathan,
think
you got
to
anything?
me, to me, the thing that you can do is if you remember, if you're experienced enough to remember the paper test when we had to give speaking to every student individually, and it took 30, 45 minutes to an hour to give that test. If you have never done that, imagine and familiarize yourself with the idea of what it used to look like when we gave that test individually to every student. Students spoke better, and we saw speaking scores go down when kids started to take these tests with a computer. And a
Mhm.
big part of that, you have to, and I think it's important to just ask yourself what was a part of that. But I think a big part of that was they lost what speaking is actually about, which is talking to another person.
For sure.
And so I always tell people, Deann made the comment about scheduling, and, scheduling 5 in a room sometimes is really not appropriate.
Right.
Mhm.
And to optimize results, two things are really important, I think, and that is you want to be able to pay attention to students, even though they're not talking to you. You need to pay attention to them,
Yeah,
and they need to see that there is a person there that they can connect to, because it's so hard to connect to a computer. And yes, of course, you want to practice getting them to connect to computers, but it helps if you, in that same spirit of when we used to give these tests individually, if you're there to connect to your students. So, and that also means don't ignore them. One of the things that I dislike is when I'm going and visiting, and I'll visit a classroom, and this teacher will say, "Oh, well, she's taking the speaking test. Yeah, we can come out in the hall, or we can, like, you can come sit in here or whatever, right?" And yes, I see your head, Deann. I misspoke, but in other words, she's taking a speaking test. You be quiet. You can come, whatever it is. And it seems like something's wrong here, right? You're not paying attention to that student in a way that, and the speaking test requires so much concentration, and it can be over so quickly
Mhm.
that you really, if you're not a part of that speaking test administration for as few kids as possible, you just, I mean, you're doing the opposite of optimizing results, I think.
for sure.
Yeah. And I
But
would say too, remember, you're not recording they're not conversing necessarily. They
yeah.
are responding with a verbal answer. So just kind of keep that part of it in mind as well.
Yeah, for sure. Deanne, just a quick yes or no, and what are the rules?
Yep.
Can we translate instructions for students who do not speak English? What are the rules on that?
Yes, you may. Any part of the instructions, items may not be translated. So that gets a little sticky in first through third grade, when you are reading like the writing prompts out loud to them, those cannot be translated. But anything that tells them what to do or how to do it, you can translate it. And that also means you can reword it. So we just want them to understand what to do. Okay. You need to follow the script at least one time, but then just make sure they know what they're doing.
Yes, for sure. Sorry, I just saw Heather saying I was typing a response. I heard they can
Yeah.
write their notes on thoughts on a note card. Just keep in mind, y'all,
Yeah.
you can do bullet points, but they can't write a script because that defeats
Yeah.
the purpose of the
Yeah.
speaking.
The point is not that they script an answer. If they need some talking points, that's okay.
Yeah.
Um, but you
Yeah.
don't want them to script their answer.
No, and Heather, I would say maybe like 3 feet. That would be as close as I would. But honestly,
Yeah.
if you're in a computer lab, I would say at least 2 to 3 computers in between, at least. Um,
Mhm.
But
and
I think I just interpret that question as being, so if you're the teacher, you're the administrator, and you're trying to, pay attention to the student. But 3 feet I mean, just again, my
yeah,
thought is, what was it like when we used to give this test one-on-one, and we would sit there across the table from someone? I mean, sitting across the table, certainly standing close enough to where you can just see what they're doing, and just make sure that they know that you're paying attention, and it is more likely that they will pay attention too.
Yeah.
yeah. And I would just say, Heather, I mean, honestly, most kids prefer to sit further apart because you can hear when somebody else starts their response. So the further
But
you can,
definitely separate students from each other for
yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You don't want to. Oh, you, yeah, and just I don't know, be chill. Like, don't be looking over their shoulder because you're not supposed to be looking at the test anyway, right? So
right? Don't be suspicious.
don't be suspicious. Just a little suspicious. I'm
Just a little suspicious.
okay.
And
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
you're walking the room and monitoring the room as
Yeah.
well, because
Yeah.
you want to make sure they're not reading. It's a whole thing. Use your professional judgment.
You want them to know that you're paying attention to what they're doing, basically. So, but
Yep.
not doing them. Jonathan, so for this one's kind of hard
Mhm.
because this, especially if you don't come from a special education background and you start being an ML teacher, and this can be really difficult. So, what are some tips for administering alt access or just regular access to a student in a self-contained classroom when an ML teacher may not feel confident in doing so?
So my answer, and I'll like to see what Deanne's response to this is if she'll shake her head at me, but you keep in mind, I always tell people that you have to be a certified teacher to administer access.
Right.
And that teacher, somebody else can administer alt access if they're prepared to. And then if you have a sped teacher who's prepared, right? I mean, Deanne, am I wrong about this?
You're right.
Right. So if you're not comfortable doing it, maybe their teacher, I have seen a lot where, I mean, do not
Really
administer
good.
a lot of
I've
alt access.
never thought about that. If they're
But I
trained,
have
good.
seen more often than not, an ESOL teacher will come to me and say, "This teacher is comfortable giving this test to them, and we talked about it." I mean, I give them a Weedle, give them access to the portal, let them do the training. They can give alt access. They're used to giving alt tests in all the other subject areas. So that's my go-to answer is maybe especially if you're not confident doing it. But then the other advice is just, I mean, just be good to the kid,
Mhm.
like it's not, you're not asking them to write a dissertation. Go in, do the test, and be pleasant.
Yep. I would tag onto that. Remember, familiar face, familiar place. So that student's going to feel more comfortable with a familiar face, right? Like Jonathan said, as long as they have been appropriately trained and passed the proper WIDA course, a certified teacher can give that assessment. Remember, you also need a monitor for alt access, and maybe that's the ESOL teacher. Maybe you sit in and you monitor as they give it. Start to develop a relationship with the child, start to develop a relationship with that teacher. Maybe next year it'll be different. But yeah, all of that is okay.
Yeah,
And
for
also too, though, I mean, you should have some sort of relationship. I mean, it's always different. I know that there's a lot more gray with what kind of student, what kind of who the student is. But when I've seen successful teachers give alt, it's because they also have a relationship with that student and they can cultivate the relationship. I mean, it's service, right? Like they have
Right.
to serve that student in some capacity. And so that to me, it's just, you're feeling confident is a good reminder that you still serve that student and you should feel really confident around that student. If you don't, yeah, I mean, work with the special education teacher who's trained to help to feel confident so that you can learn how to be confident around those students.
yeah,
Yep.
for sure. And I know personally, I would use a lot of self-contained classrooms have their own behavior system, whether they're earning check marks towards a reward or something. And I would make sure I talk to the teacher ahead of time and say, hey, is it okay if I do that? And so they can get a reward when they come back to class.
Yeah.
Or something like that, just so I was kind of building off of what the teacher did. And then that way the kids were working towards something that was familiar to them, basically. So that was a good idea too. All right. Oh, okay. Thank you, Gretchen. All right. Okay, so after access testing. All right. So, Jonathan, what are your tips for ensuring that you have actually tested?
I mean, this is one of those, like, if you get to the end and you haven't you're not organized enough, typically you should, you want to be organized going into it. Um, I don't know. I end up answering more questions when it comes to students that were too difficult to actually test, more than feeling like you missed somebody.
Yeah.
But because I think to me, this is just, if you're not organized going into it, if you don't have that relationship with your database person, with your registrar, with your testing coordinator, if you're not aware of who all the students in your school are, if you don't have that Excel spreadsheet that's personal, I know I'm checking off when I've given these things. If you didn't have a schedule going into it, you know, every student has a session that this is where they're supposed to be. They're absent. I marked when they were absent. I moved them over onto a needs to do a makeup session, spreadsheet of your own. I mean, it's that my go-to answer here is all about staying organized more
Yeah.
than anything else.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure. Deann?
Like Jonathan said, Excel is also my friend. I made a spreadsheet with every kid, and then they had a reading, a writing, a speaking, and a listening box. And I would put the date when they left me because they had finished the test. And so I would complete that for every kid. Then I also did a makeup roster for my STC. Your STC can also go into WIDA AMS and track their progress. So, as long as they're an online taker, you can also see there if they've completed the test.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think the biggest obstacle for this to me is just when you might have a new student enroll that you didn't know about,
Sure.
and there's just students coming out of the woodwork for some reason, and that's I mean, that's going to happen too. You have to be prepared for new students to enroll and continue to cultivate those relationships with your registrar.
Yep. Buy them chocolate.
Yeah. Again, if just reiterating, even though the answer is yes, but if a student enrolls and you screen them and they qualify, do they still have to take an access test during the access window?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
As long as, if they enroll like in the
The
last
day
week or
before,
two,
yes. Yeah.
you got to have time to do the
Yeah.
things. But
For
if
sure.
you get a kid in January and you haven't tested them in March,
Yeah.
that's not cool.
One thing that I would say is just don't be that teacher who's like, no, I finished.
Yeah.
And then a new
No,
student,
you
I don't
didn't.
care if a new student comes in, I finished testing.
No, you didn't.
Give students a chance to see the test, right? So that goes back to the comment I made about these kids are the experts at access.
Yeah.
Like, give them the chance to see it, because if they take it now, they just started with you. There's no accountability, right? They don't. This is not a year that counts for them. All this is them, and it's just like with the WIDA screener. The WIDA screener sucks because you have to give a kid who stares at you like all of these questions, right? But they're just building that experience for that time when you want it to be easy for them to exit. Give them the opportunity to take the test. It's low pressure. I mean, be nice about it.
For
See what
sure.
happens.
We had in my previous district in my school, we had a lot of students who would go back to India for like 2 weeks or so on vacation. So my tip, besides having your spreadsheets and everything, is make sure you know your students well enough and talk with your power school person enough to know when someone's going out of town for an extended period of time, so you can go ahead and give it to them. So just before they go. So
build relationships with families too.
yeah, for sure, absolutely, that they can let you know for sure. Um,
Yes, Melinda, every alternate access test session needs an administrator and a monitor.
So Deann, what are the basic, I know the districts generally handle walking teachers through this, but what are the basic procedures for turning in materials? Basically, which materials should I be keeping and which ones?
None of them.
None of them.
When in
I'm so
doubt,
glad you said that, Deann, because you don't know how often I've just told people, just like put it all in a box. I don't care. As long as like every colored paper that just has a barcode on, just put it all in there and send it let WIDA sort it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, teachers, don't keep anything in your room. Give it to your SDC. They're trained and they're the ones who need to be turning those materials in. Yeah, don't take a chance. Just don't chance it. Turn it all in.
Yeah, for sure. What is your district supposed to do about test tickets? Like at the end of the test session, like what is your ideal for test tickets if you're done with them?
What I hope is that the district has a policy about what that should look like. If I ran the zoo, if I were in charge,
right,
those would be returned to the STC. The STC would keep those until we're certain we have school reports back in the building, and then securely destroy them, so shred them. or return them to your DTC and
Yeah.
have them follow that procedure.
Yeah, for sure. Just wanted to make sure people didn't just throw it in their trash can. So
No,
don't,
please don't. Please
don't
don't.
throw it in your trash can.
Please don't.
Yeah. Dan, just quick for you. Someone asked about exit criteria whenever you do an access thing. People always want to know, is there an update on it yet? And then someone else asked, would it ever be under consideration for students to take only one portion of the access test or something, which they didn't meet exit criteria?
So the federal requirement for this assessment says that we must assess all 4 domains.
Okay.
So that's why we give all 4 domains every time. As for exit criteria, there is no update. We are still operating under the same proficiency criteria. If you do have questions about that, you can direct those to your Title III.
Yep.
And so Susan would be happy to answer those questions for you. Refer back to that memo, and it has all the information that you need if you should have questions.
Yep.
I just want to plug for all you awesome people in the ML Educator Network. If you're going to advocate for anything, any changes when it comes to access and exiting and the results, if I could convince you somehow to get behind, instead of talking about, oh, kids should not, if they pass a section, they shouldn't have to take that section. Let's get behind creating some sort of alternate pathway to exit that's based on other pieces of data where we're triangulating and we have recommendations from teachers. Let's advocate together for another way to exit that has nothing to do with access, or looks at a piece of access, but also something else. And so if we can start asking people, like, I just think we're gonna run up against a wall if we're divided, and there's people out there who are saying, yeah, I really think that it should be that kids who pass speaking should not have to take the speaking again. We're not getting anywhere with that, but there are other examples in other states where there are other criteria for exiting. And if our state had another way to, like, if you pass the English EOC, you should not have to take access anymore. There should be some sort of other criteria. And if we could all get behind that, I don't know. What can I do to convince you to get behind that with me? Because
you
that's
don't have
what
to convince
folks
me.
need. That's what we need.
Access is just one test, and and that's hard that we're basing one test on whether or not someone's a part of a federal program, basically. So 100%. Awesome. So thank you, Dan. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you guys so much. This was so great to just listen to you guys. Thank you for we had about 50 people here today. Certificates will be emailed soon. Give us a day or so to get that out. Melinda put in the feedback survey again in the chat box. Please, before you close your computer tonight, fill that out, or you can click on it and fill it out on your phone. It's just a Google form. We would really appreciate any feedback you have. It's really quick. Once again, you can follow us on social media. You can join our mailing list. You can do all those things. And that's all I have for you guys. Thank you so much. Good luck with access testing. You guys are going to do amazing. Just, you don't worry about it either. Don't make your kids stress about it, but don't worry about it either. It'll be over before you know it. And let us know how we can help you with that. So thank you all, and hope you have a great evening.
Yeah. Good luck.
Yes.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
There's some good questions in the chat too for folks who's sorry we didn't get to those questions.
I think we covered most of them from what actually. Yeah, we brought them up, but I thank you guys so much for bringing things in. So,
and y'all call, email.
Yes,
that's my job. Ask your STC, ask your DTC.
Yes.
Just get permission first, so you're not like the person who sent an email to the Department of Education without your principal knowing. That happens, Deann. You can't advise people to send you an email, because you know how many principals will get mad at me for letting somebody
follow your district protocol.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go. But those principals are sure welcome to email Deann at any time. All right. Thank you,
y'all.
Dan. Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Bye, y'all.